The Sierra grill was buzzing with the usual lunch rush plates clattering, silverware scraping against dishes, voices blending into an indistinct hum. Megan, a 23-year-old waitress, was running on fumes. She had been on her feet since the morning, dealing with customers who seemed to think their entire day depended on the exact amount of dressing on their salad or the crispiness of their fries. She had perfected the fake smile, the polite nod, the subtle eye roll that no one noticed except her co-workers. She wasn't a bad waitress, at least. That's what she told herself. She was just tired. Tired of rude customers who barely acknowledged her presence, tired of bosses who only cared about efficiency, tired of scraping by with barely enough tips to make rent. This wasn't the life she had imagined. She had come to California thinking she would figure things out, maybe go to school, maybe find something better. But 2 years later, she was still stuck here, taking orders from people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after they left. And then he walked in. Megan barely noticed him at first. Just another old man, moving slower than the impatient lunch crowd, dressed in a worn flannel shirt, faded jeans and boots that looked older than she was. A cowboy hat rested on his head, tilted slightly forward, casting a shadow over his face. He didn't look like much. Just another customer, another seat to fill. She sighed and grabbed her notepad, making her way over. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone clipped but serviceable. The man looked up at her, his face unreadable. His eyes were sharp, almost too sharp for someone his age. They held something that unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put a finger on why. "Burger," he said simply. "Black coffee, of course." The simplest, cheapest thing on the menu. Megan barely concealed her smirk. "No fries?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Gotta save up for the bus ride home." The man didn't react the way she expected. No huff of indignation, no annoyed mutter. Just a slow, considering look. He let the silence stretch a little too long, making her shift uncomfortably. "That'll be all," he finally said. Megan nodded, jotted down the order, and turned on her heel. Something about him bothered her, though she couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was the way he didn't take the bait, didn't react the way most people would. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he was seeing something deeper than just another tired waitress with an attitude. Back at the counter, she handed the order to the kitchen and leaned against the wall, rubbing her temples. "Table 12 giving you trouble, Danny?" one of the other waiters asked as he passed by. Megan scoffed. "Just another old guy who thinks silence makes him mysterious." Danny glanced over at the man and frowned slightly. "He looks kind of familiar." Megan rolled her eyes. Yeah, maybe he's some retired movie star. Or maybe he just looks like every other old cowboy who refuses to admit the West is dead." Danny snorted and moved on, but Megan's mind lingered on it for a second longer than she wanted. When she brought the food to his table, the man barely acknowledged her. Just a nod, a quiet thank you. "You're welcome," she said, unable to resist adding, "Enjoy your gourmet meal." The man picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and then finally looked directly at her. "Do you enjoy your job?" he asked. Megan blinked. The question caught her off guard. "What, your job?" he repeated. "Do you like it?" She let out a short laugh. "It's a job," he nodded thoughtfully. "And how you do it, does that matter to you?" Megan felt irritation creep in. Who was he to ask her that? Some random guy who ordered a burger and coffee. "Look," she said, crossing her arms, "I do what I have to do, okay? Not everyone has the luxury of sitting around, philosophizing over their coffee." The man didn't argue. He didn't scold her or tell her to have a better attitude. He just smiled small, almost knowing. And somehow that was worse. Megan huffed and turned away, heading back to the counter, feeling more rattled than she had any reason to be. The guy was just a customer. Just another table. So why did she feel like she had already lost something? Megan had handled difficult customers before. Some were rude, some were dismissive, and others were just plain ignorant. But this guy, this old cowboy, was something different. He wasn't confrontational, he wasn't demanding, and yet something about him made her skin itch. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he saw right through her, or maybe it was the way he never reacted the way she expected. Either way, she just wanted him to finish his meal and leave. But he wasn't in a hurry. Every time she glanced over, he was still there, taking his time with his burger, sipping his coffee like he had nowhere to be. Most people came in, ate and left within 20 minutes. Not him. He sat back in his chair, observing everything: the staff, the customers, the way the restaurant operated. And Megan didn't like it. When she came by to check on his table, she plastered on the same half-hearted smile she always used when she was forced to be polite. "Everything good?" she asked, her tone dripping with forced enthusiasm. He nodded. "Perfectly fine." She waited for him to say something else, maybe ask for the check. But he didn't. He just took another sip of coffee, watching her in that slow, deliberate way that made her feel like she was under a microscope. What she finally snapped, her patience wearing thin. The man tilted his head slightly, as if debating whether or not to answer. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he said, "You remind me of someone." Megan scoffed. "Let me guess. Your granddaughter." His smile didn't waver. "No. Someone a lot like you, though. Young, impatient. Always in a rush to get somewhere else." She folded her arms. "And where did they end up?" His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something distant. "Didn't matter," he said. "They never figured out where they wanted to go." Megan rolled her eyes. "Look, I don't know what you're getting at, but I've got other tables to check on. Enjoy your meal." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Hold on a second." She exhaled through her nose, turning back. "What?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill, setting it on the table next to the check. "For your trouble," he said simply. Megan stared at the bill, then back at him. "You serious? Take it." She hesitated. $100 tip? From some random old guy who barely spoke the whole time? It didn't make sense. Her first instinct was to think there was a catch, but he just sat there, waiting. Slowly, she reached for the bill, fingers brushing the edge of it. "Thanks, I guess," she muttered, stuffing it into her apron pocket before he could change his mind. The man nodded, still watching her. "Let me ask you something," he said. "What do you think makes a person respectable?" Megan frowned. "What kind of question is that?" He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Respect isn't something you get because of your job title or your paycheck. It's not about age either. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat people, even when you don't think it matters." Megan bristled. "You trying to teach me a lesson or something?" "Not at all," he said. "Just making conversation." "Well, if you're looking for life advice, you're in the wrong place." "I don't need advice," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "But maybe you do." Megan clenched her jaw. She wanted to tell him off, to remind him that he was just another customer, just another nameless face passing through her shift. But before she could say anything, he stood up, slipping his wallet back into his pocket. "I should be going," he said, adjusting his hat. "But I'll tell you one last thing before I go." Megan crossed her arms. "Can't wait." He gave her a small smirk. "Be careful who you write off. You never know who's watching." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his pace unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Megan watched him go, her fists clenched at her sides. What the hell was that supposed to mean? She shook her head, brushing it off. Just some old guy trying to sound wise. It didn't matter. He was gone. Or so she thought. Because less than a minute after he walked out, her manager, Carol, came rushing out from the back office, her eyes scanning the restaurant frantically. "Where is he?" she asked, breathless. Megan blinked. "Who?" "The man who was sitting at table 12. Megan furrowed her brow. He just left." Carol's face paled. "You're joking." Megan shook her head. "Why?" Carol exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Megan, do you even know who that was?" Something about her tone made Megan's stomach twist. Carol didn't wait for an answer. She turned toward the rest of the staff and, with the kind of urgency that made Megan's throat go dry, said Clint Eastwood was just here. The room fell silent. Megan felt the blood drain from her face. No, that wasn't possible. Clint Eastwood? The Clint Eastwood. The legendary actor, director, and Hollywood icon. Her stomach turned. She thought back to every word she had said to him, every sarcastic remark, every dismissive look. Oh no, she had just insulted the owner of the restaurant, and worse, he knew it. Megan felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum, her mind drowning in the realization of what had just happened. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. And she had treated him like some washed-up old man who couldn't afford fries. Her heart pounded as she turned to Carol, praying that this was some kind of sick joke. "You're messing with me, right?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too strained. Carol wasn't smiling. "Megan, I would never joke about this." The staff was already whispering, heads turning in her direction. Some of the other waiters exchanged glances, their eyes widening as they put the pieces together. She could feel the weight of their stares, the slow-building horror of realization setting in. She had been rude, disrespectful. She had practically mocked him to his face. Megan swallowed hard. But he didn't say anything. Carol gave her an incredulous look. What was he supposed to say? "Hi, I'm Clint Eastwood, legendary filmmaker, and I own this place, so maybe don't treat me like garbage." Megan's stomach twisted into knots. "He must be furious," Carol muttered, rubbing her temple. "I have to call corporate." The words hit Megan like a punch to the gut. She had worked in this restaurant for 2 years, never really caring about promotions or recognition, but suddenly, the idea of being fired felt like a death sentence. It wouldn't just be a lost paycheck, it would be humiliation. A permanent stain on her name. Her legs moved before her brain caught up. "Wait," she blurted. "He left a tip." Carol gave her a sharp look. "What?" Megan fumbled into her apron pocket, pulling out the $100 bill he had given her. "See?" He wasn't mad. If he was, why would he leave this? Carol's expression darkened. "That wasn't a tip, Megan. That was a test." Megan's hands trembled as she stared at the bill. $100. At the time, it had felt like an unexpected win, like maybe the old guy wasn't so bad after all. But now it felt like something else entirely. A test. Be careful who you write off. You never know who's watching. The words came back to her, chilling this time. He had known. He had known exactly what he was doing. And she had walked straight into it. Panic coiled in her chest. What should I do? Carol exhaled, shaking her head. Right now? Pray that he doesn't call corporate himself. Megan felt like she might throw up. For the next hour, she barely functioned. Every time the restaurant phone rang, she jumped. Every time Carol walked by, she flinched. The whispers among the staff grew louder, and it didn't take long before one of the busboys, Jeremy, finally said what everyone was thinking. "You're screwed." Megan snapped her head toward him. "Shut up." Jeremy raised his hands. "I'm just saying, you mouthed off to Clint freaking Eastwood. You don't come back from that." Megan gritted her teeth. He didn't say anything. If he was pissed, wouldn't he have done something? Jeremy smirked. Maybe he's the type who likes to watch people dig their own graves. A cold shiver ran down Megan's spine. She had to do something. By the time her shift ended, she had made up her mind. She was going to find Clint Eastwood and apologize. Maybe he hadn't left town yet. Maybe she could explain, make things right before he had a chance to call corporate and get her fired. It was a stupid plan, but it was the only one she had. She hurried out of the restaurant, pulling out her phone. A quick search told her that Eastwood had a house nearby. He had lived in Carmel by the sea for years. That meant he was still in town. She just had to find him. But how? She started with the most obvious place, the parking lot. His car had to be there. Except she had no idea what kind of car he drove. She wandered past the rows of vehicles, scanning them uselessly, but came up empty. Her pulse quickened. Maybe she had already missed him. Maybe he was sitting somewhere right now, dialing the number that would get her fired. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted him. He was across the street, walking toward a small cafe, his pace unhurried, his hands in his pockets. He hadn't left. This was her chance. Megan sprinted across the street, dodging a slow-moving car that honked at her, but she didn't stop. She reached the cafe just as Clint Eastwood opened the door. "Wait," she called, breathless. He paused, turning slightly. His expression was unreadable, the same calm, measured look he had given her in the restaurant. Megan swallowed hard. I need to talk to you." He studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Go ahead." Megan exhaled shakily. "I didn't know who you were. If I had, I wouldn't have." He held up a hand, silencing her. "Stop right there." She froze. "Close." His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and steady. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently." Megan hesitated. Well, that's the problem," he said simply. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. He didn't sound angry. He didn't even sound disappointed. He just sounded like a man who had already figured her out. Megan clenched her fists. "Look, I get it. I was rude. I was an ass. But I need this job. I can't afford to get fired over one bad shift." Clint Eastwood studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded toward a table. "Sit." Megan hesitated, then did as she was told. He took the seat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "Tell me why you work there," she frowned. "What? Why do you work at that restaurant?" Megan shifted uncomfortably. "Because I need to pay rent. Same as everyone else." Eastwood nodded. "And do you think that's enough?" She frowned. "Enough for what? To go through life like that," he said. "Coasting. Treating every day like a burden. Thinking that the people in front of you don't matter." Megan felt her face heat up. "I don't." "You do," he said. "You think that job is beneath you, and maybe it is. Maybe you're meant for something bigger. But until you figure that out, you should know one thing." She swallowed hard. "What's that?" He leaned forward slightly. "The way you do one thing is the way you do everything." The words hit her harder than she expected. He leaned back, took a sip of his coffee, and glanced toward the door. "You don't need to apologize to me, kid. You need to figure out who you want to be." Megan sat in stunned silence. Clint Eastwood finished his coffee, placed a few bills on the table, and stood up. "Good luck," he said, tipping his hat slightly. Then he walked out, leaving her alone with a weight in her chest she didn't know how to shake. Megan sat frozen in the cafe, her hands gripping the edge of the table as the weight of what had just happened settled in. The realization that she had just mocked Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood, was bad enough. But the way he had handled it, the calm, knowing way he had looked at her, left a pit in her stomach that wouldn't go away. She wanted to tell herself it wasn't a big deal, that he wasn't the type to care about some random waitress with a bad attitude. But the words he had left her with echoed in her head, gnawing at her. "The way you do one thing is the way you do everything." Megan scoffed under her breath, trying to shake off the unease. Who the hell did he think he was, giving her life advice? He was just some old guy with a famous face. She didn't need some millionaire Hollywood legend lecturing her about work ethic. But even as she tried to dismiss it, a small, unwelcome voice in the back of her head whispered he wasn't wrong. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her back to reality. She picked it up and immediately frowned at the flood of notifications. "Jeremy, holy shit, check Twitter right now." "Danny, Megan. You're trending. Unknown number, hope you didn't like your job too much." Her stomach clenched as she clicked on the first link she saw. And there it was. A video. A video of her. A video of her. The shaky phone footage, clearly taken by a customer at the restaurant, showed her walking up to Clint Eastwood's table. It captured everything: the impatient way she leaned against the table, the sarcasm dripping from her voice, the eye roll when he ordered his meal. The clip wasn't even that long, maybe 30 seconds, but it was enough. The caption beneath it read, "Waitress mocks Clint Eastwood in his own restaurant. Watch what happens next." Megan felt her stomach drop as she scrolled through the comments. Unbelievable. Imagine treating a legend like this. "This is why I can't stand going out to eat. No respect. She better hope she likes unemployment. Clint Eastwood is a class act. She, not so much." Her breathing became shallow as she checked the view count. Over 100,000 views. And it was climbing. Fast. No, no, she muttered under her breath, gripping her phone tighter. A second video had already surfaced, this one taken from another angle, capturing the way Clint Eastwood had looked at her after she made her snide remark. The way he just sat there, unshaken, almost amused, while she made a fool of herself. Someone had slowed the footage down, adding dramatic music. The caption on that one read, "She didn't know who she was messing with." Megan's throat tightened. Another comment section, this time on Facebook. "Fire her. Trash service. Never eating there. Imagine being this dumb." A new notification popped up, this one from the restaurant's official page. Sierra Grill has limited comments on their posts. A panic shot through her like a bolt of lightning. If the restaurant was shutting down comments, that meant the backlash was serious. Her phone rang, and for a split second, she debated not answering. But when she saw Carol's name flash on the screen, she knew she had no choice. Megan swallowed hard and pressed the call button. "What the hell have you done?" Carol's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise of the cafe. I didn't know anyone was filming," Megan stammered. Carol let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, that's your excuse. Do you have any idea what kind of mess we're in? Corporate is calling me. Customers are cancelling reservations. The video's been on the news, Megan." The news. Megan's vision blurred as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just an embarrassing moment. This was public humiliation. "Carol, I'll fix it," she said quickly. "I'll make a statement. I'll apologize." "It's too late," Carol cut her off. "The damage is done." Megan felt the words coming before Carol even said them, but when they hit, they still felt like a punch to the gut. "You're fired." Her stomach twisted. "No, wait. I don't have a choice," Carol said, her voice hard. "You brought this on yourself." The line went dead. Megan sat there, staring blankly at her phone, trying to comprehend the fact that her entire life had just unraveled in real time. The job she had spent 2 years complaining about was gone. But it wasn't just gone. It had been ripped away from her in front of millions of people. Another notification popped up. A message from an unknown number. "Told you. Be careful who you write off. You never know who's watching." Megan's breath hitched. She didn't need to ask who it was from. Clint Eastwood hadn't needed to yell at her. He hadn't needed to demand her firing. He had simply let the world see her for who she was. And now, she had to live with it. Megan sat there, staring at the message, her hands clammy, her breath uneven. The cafe around her felt distant, like she was watching it through a fog. Clint Eastwood had sent her that text. Not with threats, not with anger, just a reminder. A cold, final reminder that her own arrogance had led her here. Her first instinct was denial. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't fair. A stupid video? That's what ruined her life? She had seen people do worse, had seen waiters full-on scream at customers, and nothing happened to them. But she had mocked the wrong man, and now the internet was ready to tear her apart. She needed to do something. Her hands shook as she opened Twitter again, scrolling through the endless flood of hate. The video was everywhere. News sites were picking it up. Even local TV stations were replaying the clip. Then she saw the worst thing yet. Sierra Grill issues statement on viral video. Megan's stomach twisted as she clicked on it. "At Sierra Grill, we pride ourselves on providing exceptional service to all our guests. The behavior captured in the viral video does not reflect our values. The employee in question is no longer with us. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Eastwood and anyone offended by this incident. They hadn't just fired her. They had disowned her. Megan's breath came out in short gasps as she scrolled through the replies. Good. I hope she never works in service again. Glad they fired her. But honestly, why hire people like that in the first place? She should apologize publicly. On her knees, someone find her name. She needs to learn a lesson. Megan's hands clenched into fists. It wasn't enough for them that she lost her job. They wanted more. They wanted to ruin her. Her phone rang again. This time it wasn't Carol. It was her mum. Megan hesitated, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. She answered, Mom, Megan, what did you do? Her mother's voice was sharp, frantic. Your uncle just called me. He saw you on the news. The news, Megan. Megan squeezed her eyes shut. Mum, I didn't know who he was. That's your excuse, her mother snapped. You were raised better than this. I can't believe, Megan, they're calling our house. Journalists are calling, asking for a comment. What do I even say? Megan's chest tightened. This wasn't just affecting her anymore. I'll fix it, she whispered. But even she didn't believe it, her mum scoffed. How? Do you think this will just go away? You think people will forget? Megan had nothing to say to that. Her mother exhaled sharply. You embarrassed us, Megan. You embarrassed yourself then, softer, colder. I don't know how you come back from this. The line went dead. Megan sat there, staring at her phone, feeling like the last solid piece of ground had crumbled beneath her. Her job was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. Even her family wanted nothing to do with her. And worst of all, she had done it to herself. She buried her face in her hands, trying to block out the world, trying to make it all disappear. But the world wasn't done with her yet. A shadow loomed over her table. She looked up. Clint Eastwood stood there, watching her. Her breath caught in her throat. He didn't look smug. He didn't look pleased. He just looked at her the same way he had in the restaurant, calm, steady, like he had already predicted all of this. Do you understand now? He asked. Megan's throat tightened. I understand that my life is ruined. Clint sighed, taking the seat across from her. No, your reputation is ruined. There's a difference. Megan let out a humorless laugh. Yeah? And how exactly am I supposed to fix that? Clint tilted his head slightly. That depends. Do you actually want to fix it? Megan frowned. Of course I do. I don't know how. Clint studied her for a moment. Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, worn notebook, and flipped it open. He took out a card and slid it across the table. Megan hesitated before picking it up. It wasn't what she expected. It was a contact. A job offer. What is this? She asked, staring at the card like it was a trick. Clint leaned back in his chair. An opportunity. Megan's heart pounded. After all of this, you're helping me? Clint's eyes darkened. No, Megan. I'm giving you a choice. She swallowed hard, staring down at the card, her hands trembling. If she took this job, she would have to work harder than she ever had in her life. She would have to prove herself to people who already hated her. She would have to change, or she could walk away. Disappear. Let her life crumble around her. She looked back up at Clint Eastwood. He was waiting, unreadable, patient. And Megan realized this wasn't just about a job. It was about who she wanted to be. Her fingers tightened around the card. She had a decision to make. Megan stared at the card in her hands, her fingers tightening around it, as if the answer would reveal itself if she just held on long enough. The weight of the past 24 hours crushed her chest, her job, her reputation, her family's disappointment. The internet had branded her as the most hated waitress in America, and here she was, sitting across from the man she had humiliated, the man who had every reason to let her sink, and instead he was offering her a choice. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Why, she finally asked, her voice hoarse. Why would you give me another chance? Clint Eastwood studied her for a moment before answering. Because most people, when they get knocked down, stay down. But the ones who get back up, They're the ones worth paying attention to. Megan swallowed hard. And you think I'm one of them? I don't know yet. His voice was even, steady. That's up to you. Her hands trembled. The words "it's too late for me" hovered on her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to say them. She wanted to. She wanted to believe that this was beyond fixing, that she was already ruined. That way she wouldn't have to fight for anything. But Clint Eastwood wasn't offering pity. He wasn't offering forgiveness. He was offering her a test. Her phone vibrated on the table. A new message from Jeremy. "Prom Jeremy, they found your address." Megan's blood turned to ice. She clicked the link he had sent, and her breath caught in her throat. A thread had gone viral: her name, her city, and now an address. It wasn't her current one, but it was close enough. Close enough for people to start digging deeper. Comments flooded beneath it. She needs to disappear. Find her. Want her. I'd spit in her face if I saw her. Megan's breath came fast and shallow. It didn't matter that she had been fired. It didn't matter that she had been humiliated. They wanted more. She looked up at Clint, panic flickering in her eyes. She couldn't even say it. He already knew. His expression didn't change, but there was something darker in his gaze now. A quiet, unwavering certainty. "You think you've hit rock bottom," he said. "You haven't." Megan's heart hammered against her ribs. If you don't stand up now, you never will. The truth of it made her dizzy. If she ran, she would be running forever. If she hid, she would be hiding forever. Her fingers dug into the card, knuckles white. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Slowly, she exhaled and met his gaze. "What do I have to do?" For the first time, Clint Eastwood smiled. Not a smirk, not amusement, just quiet approval. "Come with me," he said. Megan hesitated for only a second before she stood up, gripping the card like a lifeline. Clint Eastwood didn't wait for her to second-guess herself. He simply turned and walked toward the door, expecting her to follow. And she did. Because what else was there to do? Stay here, glued to her phone, watching as strangers on the internet tore her apart. Let the world decide who she was before she had a chance to prove otherwise. No, not this time. The cool evening air hit her as they stepped outside, but it did nothing to steady the storm raging in her chest. Clint led her to a car, nothing flashy, just a simple black truck that looked like it had seen some miles. He opened the driver's side door, but before getting in, he turned to her. "You're about to find out what you're made of," he said. "Most people can't handle that." Megan swallowed, still unsure if she could handle it. But at this point, what choice did she have? She climbed into the passenger seat, heart pounding. The drive was silent at first. Megan's thoughts raced, her mind flipping between the wreckage she had left behind and the unknown she was stepping into. She still didn't fully understand where they were going or what Clint had planned for her. And honestly, she wasn't sure if she wanted to know. After a few minutes, she couldn't take it anymore. "Where are we going?" Clint didn't take his eyes off the road. "Somewhere quiet." That's ... not an answer. He smirked slightly. "You're still talking like someone who thinks they have control." Megan exhaled sharply, turning to stare out the window. The neon lights of the city faded into darkness as they left the main roads, heading toward a part of town she didn't recognize. The uncertainty clawed at her, but for the first time in a long time, she let it sit. Finally, they pulled into a gravel driveway. The building in front of them was nothing special, an old ranch-style house with a wide front porch and a few dim lights glowing inside. Megan had expected something grander, maybe an office, maybe a studio, maybe something that screamed Clint Eastwood. But this just looked ... normal. Clint shut off the engine and turned to her. "You want to fix your life?" "It starts here," Megan frowned. "Where is here?" He opened his door without answering. She followed, more out of confusion than anything else. As they stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open before Clint even knocked. A woman stood there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and looked like the kind of person who didn't tolerate nonsense. "This her?" she asked. Clint nodded. The woman gave Megan a slow, evaluating look before stepping aside. Then let's see if she sinks or swims. Megan felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had no idea what she had just walked into, but there was no turning back now.